All right, we are live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Secular Jihadists. Once again, we have an amazing guest who's been here before recently, Catherine Shakdam. Now, for those who don't know, Catherine is a very icy and controversial figure. After she spent some time in Iran, she changed some things about her mind and um, has written a lot for the Times of Israel, and some of these articles, got picked up by different Iranian groups, and they supposedly exposed her as an Israeli spy. But we're here to talk about an article she recently did for the Times of Israel, which I believe made the front page, and it's called What We've Missed About Iran on Its Ideology of Anti-Semitism and Why It Matters. And in this article, Catherine makes some very interesting assertions about the anti-Semitism within the ideology of Iran, how fundamental it is to the regime itself, and also how this affects her opinion about the JCPOA. And so it's fantastic to have Catherine back. It's so much fun.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, interesting piece. So in this article, if I want to summarize it, you talk about how you think that they in getting rid of the JCPOA deal was a good idea because you think based on your experience of the ideology that governs the Islamic Republic of Iran and whoever's all the people that are in charge and responsible for decision making, you thought that anti-Semitic views is such a fundamental part of their ideas and part of their decision making that there's no excuse that there should be no way for any path for this government to anything nuclear related. Is that like a good? Is that like the gist of the article? Would you agree with it, or is there? What am I missing?
Yes. I mean, what I really wanted people to understand is that, when we talk about Iran and the kind of narrative that they weaved around their state institutions, is profoundly rooted in anti-Semitism. But it's the kind of anti-Semitism, that we've witnessed in the 1930s, in that it seeks and calls for the genocide of an entire people, not just the state of Israel. And that is important. So the reference of, death to America, death to Israel, is not, as they often have claimed, a reference to a state or, the politics of a government. And it's directly to, Israel here is like Jacob, as in, biblical Jacob, as in the sons of Israel. So basically the Jews, as a people. This is what they're calling for. And I think it's important that we understand the nature of the type of, fascism that is coming out of Iran. If we, ever have the hope to, number one, topple the regime, or even number two, should you wish to do so, to engage with them as partners. Because I believe it's important, if you want to engage with another party, to actually understand that party and make sure that there's no conceptual kind of dichotomy in the way that you address them, or could hope that they would understand the kind of agreement that you're entering. The kind of, for example, if you go back to the Oslo agreements, Rabin and Arafat at the time had very different ideas of what that agreement meant on paper. And I think that's why, we are facing the kind of difficulty that we have today. At its, on the conceptual level, they had very different understanding of what that meant. And I think that we should not make the same mistake with Iran. We need to be very clear about what it is that they are and who they are and how they think. So that's why I thought it was important. And, once again, it's Ramadan, and, with the violence coming out of Israel, the attacks that Palestinians have carried out against, not only just holy sites, but innocent civilians in the streets, not just of Jerusalem, but other cities across Israel. I think it was timely to kind of understand what is pushing that type of violence.
Okay, but so what gave you? So there are things that they say, and the things that they believe, and the things that they believe so fundamentally that governs everything that they do, right? And sometimes these three things are different. I want to can you tell us what gave you the impression that this is not just something that they fundamentally believe, but what gives you the point of view that they are so eager to act upon these views to the point of being extremely dangerous for Israel?
I've had, during my stay in Iran, I had conversation. I traveled to Qom and Mashhad, and, I sat down with several ayatollahs, in the Houza. So, those people are basically teaching, students in, Islamic studies. So they're basically shaping the next, religious class in Iran. I've spoken to, members of Sepah, I've spoken to members of parliament, I've spoken to members of the government. And when they were referring to Israel, a lot of the time they, replace the word Israel with the Jews. And I very quickly understood that by the state of Israel, they actually made as an extension, they meant, the world Jewry. So for them, there's no distinction in between, being an Israeli and being a Jew. It's the same thing. And I think this is the link was made somewhere because, Israel said that it is the home of the Jewish people, that it is for the Jewish people. And that in large, the Jewish community obviously supports Israel, for many great, different reasons. But, in large, most Jews, do agree that Israel needs to be and should be, except for maybe like the Neturei Karta, and they represent like a minority within the minority of a minority. So for them, it's the same thing. And I think it's important that we talk about this because I feel that in the public discourse, people are under the belief that when Iran is referring to death to Israel, it's talking to a country and a political system as opposed to a people. And there's a large difference because that would mean that as far as our, elected representatives are concerned, that they're paying lip service to a government that is calling for genocide and actually allowing them to have a platform to do so. I felt that it was time to kind of ring the alarm a bit and tell people that you might want to pause for a second and understand what is it that they're saying so you know who you're talking to and the kind of ideology that they're supporting.
Okay, so some people will suggest that at the end of the day, the main thing that they're interested in, so a lot of this anti-Israeli talk is not, it's mostly, a lot of it could be for gaining followers and appealing to the people's hatred for, Israel or Jewish people, appealing to that to show themselves as champion of the fight against, Zionism or defenders of the Palestinian people. And that is the front. But their main agenda, the actual agenda, is survival and strength and power. And these people, as religious and fanatic as they are, they're not idiots. I mean, they are strategic. That's why, that's arguable. In certain things, they are idiots. Susanna's laughing, which is muted. But they are strategic enough to have been able to survive for the past 43 years against everybody trying to remove them from power. Like, they have been successful at that. And
I don't think it's a sign of intelligence. I think it's just a sign that the oppressive tools that they're using against their own people are working. I would not equate this to a sign of intelligence or even a sign that the system is somewhat viable. I think it's just fascism. It's just the expression of fascism, and fascism works, to some extent for a period of time. Nazi Germany wasn't really successful, but it worked for a little bit, because it was using, specific tools of propaganda and oppression. And kind of like, the engineering consent. And I think this is exactly what the regime has done.
Okay, but they're not
just
effective. But would you agree, that they are at least intelligent enough to know that an attack, a direct attack, like going confrontational war with Israel or using nuclear weapons against Israel, would be their last day in power? Like, that would be the end of them. They know that. Yeah.
I do. I would give you this. What I do agree with is I don't believe for a second that Iran would want to have, a frontal attack against Israel and, with this military. Number one, because I think that the entire Islamic world has been traumatized by the 6 Days War. Because the Israeli had like 3 spoons, a fork, and a tank, and they managed to wipe out 6 armies. No, seriously, several Arab armies that were rather powerful back then. Egypt and Iraq were a military superpower at the time, and Israel, which is like the size of a peanut on the map, just managed to wipe them out in 6 days, unheard of in history. And I think that Iran understands that it's not in the position to declare war on Israel and maybe face the possibility of a massive failure and basically end up being the laughingstock of history, because it would be, and the Islamic world. Now, coming from a Shia perspective and being a minority within the Islamic world, this is not something that they want to see happen, because it would literally dilute the entire narrative. And this idea that God is sitting with the person defending the oppressed against the oppressor. They would lose that narrative. So they can't do it. But by the same token, they also understand that, should they obtain a nuclear weapon, they would be in a much greater position to, push terrorist organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and all the rest of them, to put so much pressure on Israel that, Israel would become not only a pariah state, because they would be playing, the victimhood of the Palestinians against Israel on the international scene, trying to isolate Israel from its current partners, playing the anti-Semitic card and literally, hijacking, again, the public discourse and playing anti-Semitism as like the norm, because it's becoming the norm in a lot of, in a lot of places now. It's people feel entitled somewhat to be quite openly anti-Semitic, and sometimes even, in Congress or, the US Parliament. So this is something that is becoming the norm. This is Iran's indirect influence. So for them, obtaining a nuclear weapon would allow them, number one, to become the superpower of the region against Saudi Arabia and claiming, supremacy over the Islamic world in terms of guidance, religious guidance, politically and geopolitically, because they would be able to, act as a massive buffer against the influence of not only European countries, but America, and basically have free hand in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Bahrain, Kuwait, you name it, it's there, and dismantle the GCC alliance, by, again, kind of, forcing Qatar to come, to align with Iran and leaving Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and those countries to be kind of on the back foot of everything. So for them, it's not just about destroying Israel. They do want that. And, I think that ultimately that's their goal, because you have a bunch of, religious ideologues that are so hardcore, who still believe to this very day that nuking Israel would actually allow for, Imam Mahdi to come back and precipitate the end times, which they want to see. I heard that. This is the language coming out of, Ahmadinejad's camp. So they believe that. So on the off chance that they would want to actually act out that scenario that they played out in their heads, do you seriously want to sign a JCPOA? The answer should be no, and always be no. And the problem is, when you're dealing with a country that is based on a dangerous and radical religious ideology, why would you even entertain the possibility, even if it's just a fraction of a percent, to have a weapon such as that of to become a nuclear power? A nuclear weapon is not a joke. And I think that, even like we need to debate, as to whether, even secular democracy should have that kind of power. Never mind the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, the idea that we could even imagine that they would be a genuine partners in brokering peace, for me, is the very definition of what insanity is. You can't do that. You can't even imagine a moment in time where that would be okay. I don't care, the Iran would need to change so dramatically in terms of, its ideology, its state institution, the way that it thinks, the way that it is, the way that it kind of portrays itself within the region, in its relationships with other countries, for us to even begin to think that it might be okay one day.
Okay, I do want to touch up on the JCPOA. I want to go into that angle, but before I comment on what you said about that, so my understanding about what you said is that a nuclear Iran, and we're not talking a nuclear for like peaceful reasons. We're talking about nuclear,
A nuclear
like, because
weapon.
we don't.
Nuclear armament, not nuclear energy.
Well, my view is that they don't want to actually. They want to be a week away from having a nuclear weapon. Like, they would want to have the deterrent effect of being one step away from a nuclear weapon, but not actually having it pieced together as a nuke, because that will invite a million sanctions on them.
Let me cut you there, because there's something that was said in Iran just literally days ago. I don't know if you're familiar with the guy called Ali Motahari. He's the
just heard of it. Music guy to inform me of that.
He's the head of like the Voices of Iran or something like this party, the Voices of the People.
He's a reformist. He's a reformist.
Yeah, he's one of those. He's Ali Larijani's like brother-in-law. So it kind of tells you that nepotism is a thing in Iran.
And the son of the great Murtaza Motahari.
There you go. So this guy literally came out and blew the whistle. I mean, it's not a big surprise, but he was rather clear on what Iran's goal is in terms of its nuclear pursuit, and it's definitely military. He came out with it. He said it.
Yeah. But so Catherine, before him, so yes, he came out and said, like, obviously we wanted a nuclear weapon, and before him, I think Susanna and I broke the news that IRGC admitted that they were doing that. And even before both of these people, we had leaked audio of Fakhrizadeh many years ago claiming that is their mission.
Like in
the
early 2000s. Like, I think that audio was from like 2003.
I know. Yes. And my question is, like, when people tell you who they are and what they want, listen.
Believe them.
Because, they just told you. And even if you don't, you have to, because this is what they're saying.
So yeah, but what I'm saying does not contradict all of this. What I'm saying is that it's kind of like they want to have a nuclear weapon that is not put together, but you could immediately put it together. Basically, because they think if they put it together, they will have the world sanctions come raining down upon them. But it's effectively it's just a technical thing. They actually have they want to be in a situation that they effectively have a nuclear weapon, but they're only like at any point they're just a week away from having it. That's what they want. I mean, that would be I don't know if that's what they want, but that would be the most strategic things, because at the same time they have it, but they technically legally don't have it. So I think that would be the most strategic position.
But it doesn't work like this anymore. So, for example, like this theory would work if we were back in the 1950s and the Cuban crisis, because back then, it would take hours, for example, for a missile to ever hit, let's say, New York or Miami, whatever city in the U.S. From the Soviet Union, because the technology was not there. Like you had a response time, so you could see it coming, and then many things could happen. Right? We don't have that luxury anymore. So if Iran, today was to decide to assemble a nuclear weapon, I doubt that they would give you a countdown and say, hey, by the way, we're doing that. So next Monday, that's what's going to happen. They won't do that, obviously. Right. By the time that, should we learn that something has been launched, is because it already landed. This is how quick, the missile would be. So it would be like a, fraction of a second, and it would blow up Tel Aviv, and then everything is over. Why would you want? Because, by the way, let's be clear, Israel would be first in line to take it. They would not, they would not go after America or whatever. They would want to make a point. So as far as Israel is concerned, that cannot happen. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, that should not happen, because that would be, you would then normalize the possibility of a genocide, and basing it on they might be nice and not do it, but what if they do? What if, Ali Khamenei dies tomorrow, and then someone else that is even more psychotic comes in power? What do we do then? Knowing that we have allowed, the possibility of Iran assembling a weapon in a week. What if the regime falls tomorrow morning, and then we end up with a Taliban-like, government instead? So many scenarios could happen when it comes to Iran. We need to understand that the regime as it stands might look stable from the outside and have survived several decades. It's not going to survive the next 4 decades. So when you sign an international agreement, such as that of the nuclear deal, you need to think and project yourself 50 years down the line. As it stands today, Iran is not a genuine partner in brokering peace on the basis of the instability it has fomented in the region and the very nature of its institution and ideology. And that's the point I'm trying to make. And I'm not passing judgment on Iranians. or even suggesting that the Iranian people, want to genocide the rest of the world, because that is not the case. But the regime that governs them is profoundly maniacal in its understanding of the world. It's all about black and white, and thinking that if they lose, then we win, and if they win, then we are the losers of the story. Not understanding that Israel can exist outside the zero-sum game, and that Israel's flourishing as a society and a nation doesn't take away from their religion or even the ideology. Because quite frankly, Israel does not give a shit about Iran if Iran could just let go and let Israel alone.
What you have to say is really interesting to me. It reminds me a lot of things that Masih Alinejad has said. For those who don't know, Masih Alinejad is an Iranian-American journalist, and the FBI last year revealed a plot to kidnap her from American soil, transport her to Venezuela, and then transport her to Iran, where she would be in a whole world of trouble. And when that plot was revealed by the FBI, it was around the time that America was re-entering into the nuclear talks. And she said something that really stuck with me because she was speaking out kind of about the way that America was re-entering these negotiations. And she was basically saying, like, our attitude, meaning America's attitude towards entering these negotiations is fundamentally flawed, because we keep on entering into relationship or entering into interaction with the Iranian regime as if we just treat them a certain way, like they will be nicer. If we treat them a certain way, they will do the right thing. They will do the moral thing. And she was basically saying, like, politicians in our government, our administrations need to understand that this is fundamentally the nature of the Iranian regime. It is not, they don't do hostage diplomacy because they're just backed into a corner and they have no other options. No, this is fundamentally who they are, and they're not going to stop. It has been their modus operandi from the beginning. This is not about treating them better. Like, this is the fundamental nature of the regime. And so the way that you speak about it really recalls kind of her criticism.
I agree with her. I think she's on point, and I mean, she knows better than me. She's actually Iranian, so she really lived the reality of the regime. She understands it better than most. I agree with her. I think we have we got lost in translation in that. I think that the West is always projecting its own cultural background and the way that we think onto the partners that they may have throughout the world, failing to understand that not everyone sees things the way they do. And I think especially with America, there's this form of exceptionalism where you kind of been led to believe that the rest of the world not only looks up to you but thinks like you, or ought to think like you, and that if you behave with them within the line of your thinking, then they would automatically align with you. That's not the case, and Iran is a much older nation, and it's not going to change its ways in 5 minutes.
Yeah, if you agree with that stance or that attitude towards the regime, which I'm inclined to, it leads to a whole nother question, which is, how do you deal with such a bad actor when you fundamentally do not think that there is the willingness to act in good faith, period?
A good question. I think we should, but first of all, we should I tell you what we should not do, because I don't know what we should do, because I think there's a lot to unpack there, but we shouldn't pay again lip service to Iran's narrative when it comes to anti-Semitism and our failure to recognize that Hamas, Hezbollah, and all the other iterations of terror are actually acting as extensions, and it's almost the colonial expression of the Iranian regime. We need to get clear on that. We need to kind of separate the issue that is the Palestinian dossier with Palestine liberation movement as expressed by Iran and Hamas. We need to understand that. So we need to look at Hamas and the Palestinians as two different entities, and that one doesn't represent the other at all. If anything, I think that Palestinians have been completely hijacked by Hamas agenda, and Hamas does not care for Palestinians. does not want them to be free, however that is formulated, and is not interested in resolving any of the issue, because that would mean that it would disappear and cease to exist, because it would have no reason to be. By the same token, I don't believe that Hamas wants a frontal, again, doesn't want to have a confrontation with Israel in terms of like fighting a great war. It doesn't want to do that. First of all, it cannot do that. It doesn't have the popular support to do so. And again, even should they win or lose, should they lose, they're done. But should they win, it would not happen. But let's just say, for hypothetically, if that was to happen, what would happen then on day number 2? They would cease to exist, because the whole narrative is based on the hatred of the other. So if you remove Israel, Hamas is non-existent. So they need Israel to exist. But it's not true the other way around. Israel doesn't need Hamas to exist or Hezbollah to exist. It doesn't need an enemy to exist. Terror groups need an enemy to exist. And, what a better enemy than the Jewish people?
I mean, some people could argue there are certain elements, well, not Israel as entirely, but there are certain groups within Israel that need Hamas to be powerful.
That may be so, but again, we're talking about, you could take, but that is true for any society or any nation. You're always going to find, radical elements that act in reaction of, who weaved, again, their ideology around the rejection of the other. Understanding their identity in rejection of other people, to justify their own existence. That's true all the time. But it's not true and large in Israel. Israel is a rather, I would say, liberal society in that it's committed to religious freedom and allowing as much as possible people from different communities and ethnicities to cohabit together in as part of the greater whole. Only 72% of the population in Israel is actually Jewish. That tells you that it's not just it is a Jewish state, but not just for the Jewish people. It's making room for others. But you can't ask for, of Israel to tolerate, terrorism, or actually making room for people calling for the genocide of its people. It's not going to happen.
Okay, whether it's okay for Israel to be a Jewish state, and what does that mean? Let's have another episode.
Yeah, that's the whole question of Jewish identity. What are we and who are we? Yeah. And we don't have horns and tails, so there's that. To stop.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, but
that much is confirmed.
No, but we have to start somewhere. Okay, so let's just this is this is the cornerstone of any further discussion. No horns and no tails, and we are not lizards. That's it. That's important. I just want to put it out.
Okay, but no offense to anybody that has horns and tails, because that's pretty cool. Okay?
Obviously, that's fine. That's fine. But we don't do that.
Okay. But if you happen to watch and you happen to have those, in case there's any demons who watch us, we don't mean any offense. But okay, just to be clear, before I move to the JCPOA, because I want to ask you some questions about that. So let me know if this is a good analysis. Okay, the current regime in power in Iran, even if they had nuclear weapons, they would not. They're not current. They wouldn't. The likely scenario is that Israel would not be. So the danger is something else. So the danger is not that they would use it against Israel. The danger is twofold. One, because of the sense of protection that the Islamic Republic of Iran would feel for having a nuke, they would become more aggressive with their proxies against Israel, because they know they're immune from attacks, because now people will not touch them because they have nukes. That's one threat against Israel. The second threat against Israel is that the Iranian government, being a fascist state, could collapse, and all of a sudden now these nukes would be in the hands of a whole bunch of end of times nut jobs that are less like the Islamic Republic of Iran, who wants power and stability and survival, and more to bring the end of days kind of people. And that's the second type of threat that could be to Israel. These are the threats that Israel will face. Would that be a good summary of it?
That's true. And then on top of this is a third threat to the region as a whole, because obviously Saudi Arabia would not just sit kindly to nuclear Iran. So you stand the chance of having nuclear proliferation. And you would be hard pressed to convince, Mohammed bin Salman, for example, that he cannot or should not buy a nuclear weapon. Never mind building one. but actually buying one because the neighbors have one. Of course he's going to want to have them. So again, it would throw the whole region into chaos. And do you seriously want in the Middle East to have some kind of a nuclear race in countries that are profoundly broken and unstable, with dangerous ideologies like literally running rampant? Again, the answer is no, we do not want that.
I just love watching Susanna's reactions to the suggestions that you make. She's like, "Oh no!"
I literally clutched my pearls.
Okay, Susanna, do you want to add anything before I move to the JCPOA questions?
No.
Oh no, I'm ready for this tit for tat. I'll just moderate.
Okay, so with regards to the JCPOA, the argument is that moving. So, okay, the goal is to avoid having an Iran with nuclear weapons, right? Some people say, well, that was the entire point of the JCPOA. Like anybody who suggests, like, oh, we shouldn't have a deal with Iran because Iran shouldn't have we shouldn't have a nuclear deal with Iran because Iran should have nuclear weapons. People are like, yeah, that the JCPOA was meant to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon. That was the point.
Yeah, but it won't. That's the thing. So the JCPOA, as it was brokered and negotiated, is a joke. I mean, the latest joke was that they had to have some kind of a moderator or someone to kind of check up on them to make sure that they were going to do what they were going to do according to the terms of the treaty. Guess who volunteered to that task? Russia. I'm sorry, but like, no, this is like it's like a bad remake of the Joker movie. Like, no. You're not going to have Russia, who just invaded Ukraine, by the way, behaving like a fascist state, to say like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna make sure that they behave. Yeah, I believe you. I 100% believe you. Of course, like, no, sorry, but
no. Okay, but so some people will say, like, as you could call it a joke, but it was working because, and the proof is that. Okay, here's the thing. Okay, so the proof is, so people say, like, this is between bad options, we're picking the least bad. Okay, so without the deal, so as soon as the deal was removed by Trump, Iran managed to push forward for enriching uranium to levels that was unimaginable under the deal because the deal was removed. So they're saying, like, oh, you removed the deal so that Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, gets less farther away from having nuclear weapon. Look at the effects. It's because without the deal, it managed to now go up all the way up to enriching uranium to 60%, having all the equipment and knowledge and experience now that it will be impossible now to remove. So they're saying, as bad as the deal was, it was the best we could have gotten it, and without it, we are now years closer to Iran being able to make nuclear weapons.
I disagree. Let me tell you why. Because first of all, when Trump reneged on the deal, and that's true, Iran then decided to say, hey, I'm just going to go back to enriching uranium, right? You can't deduct that because Trump reneged on the deal, that this is why, as a reaction to that, this is why Iran did what it did. Because we don't know that for a fact. I mean, we could have signed the deal and they would have done that underground and we would not know about it. Okay. So the fact that we know about it is a better option. Okay. Now, as a result of this, it basically allowed for Israel to kind of take out, a few strategic, sites. I mean, they kind of, every time that Iran is doing like one step forward, Israel intervenes, and then it's like, 3 steps back and one on the side, and they do a jig. So Israel is kind of keeping, tabs on Iran and doing a great job, by the way. Thank you. The world should say thank you, but whatever.
Thank you, Mossad.
Yeah,
thank you,
yeah.
Mossad.
No, seriously, like, thank you, like, again, Mossad, anyone. To control and contain Iran's nuclear, development program. So, this is what is happening because the deal was not brokered. Should the deal have been brokered, you would basically have countries hand tied to that agreement without anyone being able to kind of, keep tabs on them, because they would be literally asleep thinking, we signed a deal, great, let's go sell cars and carpets to Iran and, let them re-enter the economy. So I think that because the deal wasn't signed, we forced Iran to kind of show their hands and actually tell us exactly who they are. Second of all, because of Trump's decision, and I'm not, trying to campaign for Trump, so that we're clear. The sanction that he slapped on the IRGC and all the rest of them really set the tone in terms of strangling Iran and preventing its ability to spread further in the region. So in my mind, reneging the nuclear deal was the best thing that could happen to the region, because it forced Iran's hands, number one. It showed us exactly what it is that they wanted to do. Because don't tell me that, it was just, you were mean to me today, so I'm just going to go and enrich uranium just to show you. That's not true. That they wanted to do that the whole time. It's just that now they had to accelerate the way that they were doing it, because they're thinking, shit, we're running out of time. They're not buying what we're saying like, oh, we want to be your friends now. So, I think that, to a great degree, Trump really kind of lifted the veil and forced Iran to kind of say, well, this is what we look like, where we're not pretending to be your friends, truly.
Well, I mean, okay, so the argument is not that we didn't know that they want that. I mean, the point of the deal was there because we knew they want that. So that was, they were trying to hold them back. It's not a revelation that they wanted that, right? So the whole deal was like, we're going to try to stop you from doing what we know you want to do, right? So, and we also understand that you can't trust the Islamic Republic of Iran and what they tell you. So we understand that. And also we understand that even with the deal, they would try to get away with stuff underground. We have evidence that they have been trying to, even while the observers were at the sites that they were supposed to be observing, they were trying to do things in other places that was not under observation. We also know that, but we're trying to look at the options that we have. The difference is that with the deal, you had some eyes on the ground. And yes, Iran could have also continued to try to get away with enriching uranium anyways, but it was extremely more difficult.
But not impossible.
Yeah, I know. We're trying to look at the. I'm not saying this was the deal was like the best. Like, the deal was not perfect, okay, but it made it so difficult that Iran was not able to get away with like this level of enrichment of uranium. Like, we know it tried to do some sneaky things without the world noticing, even while it was supposed to be under the deal. But enriching uranium to 60% requires such high level of advanced technology, and it would not be something that it could get away with doing it without being noticed, right? So it would have slowed it down significantly. It would have made it it had made it very difficult, right? And also the argument is not like, oh, they're enriching uranium because, oh, you're mean to us, so this is our revenge. No, the argument is that, well, they don't have to. Like, there's nothing that stopped. Like, before, they would be against the deal. If they enriched uranium, their hands were tied. If they wanted to enrich uranium beyond what the deal allowed, it was very difficult for them to do it in a sneaky way. But now that they're not in the deal, they're enriching uranium not just because you're mean to us, we want to take revenge. They're like, well, because there's no deal that they have to abide by. There's nothing stopped legally. They're in their right. So when Trump threw the deal out, legally they were now in the right to enrich uranium. They were not violating any international laws anymore because there's no deal that they're violating anymore. So that opened their hands to all of a sudden speed up to not to higher levels of enrichment uranium, but also to some experience and knowledge they have access to. Like, even the equipment that they have right now and the enriched uranium that they have right now, a new deal can potentially take that away from them. But what they have right now that no deal can take away is the new experience and the knowledge that they have gained to do these things again. Because of the deal was removed, no new deal can take that away from them. And that's the disaster that I think we're in, that might be in because of Trump removing that deal, right? And another thing that moving the removal of the deal did is that they managed to get a huge international propaganda win, because they were made to look like they are the victim. They were like, look, they agreed to something. We were abiding by the deal. They came and violated the deal that we had agreed to. And we were on the right. Americans apparently cannot hold on to the deals that they have signed to, while the Iranian government is. So internationally, this was a lot of people think that this was such a win for the Islamic Republic of Iran, because they got the propaganda win while also opening their hands to be able to enrich uranium to such high levels. What would you think?
I don't think I get what you're saying, and to some extent, some of the things that you're saying are true, but bear in mind that I don't think it was a win for Iran. Maybe in terms of his propaganda, but because of what he did, Trump managed to literally suffocate the Islamic Republic. So that means that he helped take down by quite a large amount Iran's ability to project its narrative outside onto the world, because they don't have the money to do so. So he literally kind of like shrunk Iran's ability to do harm to the rest of the world. And that is a significant win for me, because a nuclear deal would have meant a lifting of the sanctions, and it would have benefited not just the Iranian people, because that I'm for, but it would have benefited the IRGC. The fact that Trump listed the IRGC as a terrorist organization crippled Iran and make it so very difficult to function. So I think those were good things. And yes, maybe that now Iran gain a certain knowledge. But again, if that means that we're chipping and eroding at the very fabric of the Islamic Republic, I think that is a win, because you can't be helping a fascist regime, to have longevity. And I think a nuclear deal would do that. If you were optimistic enough to think that they would never get a nuclear weapon and that we contain them, you would buy them at least a good 2 decades of longevity. And that, in my book, that's not happening to the Iranian people. You can't ask them to live under that regime for another 2 decades.
Okay, so I'm pushing back against everything. Okay, so the pushback against that, the narrative against that would be that the sanctions that you're mentioning didn't actually hurt the elements of the Islamic Republic of Iran that are responsible for the things that you want stopped. Like, for example, the meddling that they're doing in the region. It actually might have economically helped them. What it hurt was Iranian, the civilians. They suffered because of the sanctions, but the IRGC, and the Quds army, they actually financially benefited from the sanction, because
data tells you that it's not. Yes, because they land grab, they took basically money away from the people. So they took it themselves. Let me give you anyway.
No, let me give you what the narrative is, and then you tell me why it's wrong, okay? The argument is that in Iran, the IRGC controls a whole bunch of the economy and a lot of industries, right? And without the sanctions, they have to compete with international industries, organizations. But with the sanctions, cutting off trade from the rest of the world, the IRGCs and the industries that it controls in Iran, it managed to have a monopoly without any international competition, and that actually made them have a bigger hold over Iran's economy and made them economically stronger because of the lack of international trade and competition. So economically, yes, Iran shrunk, but the relative economic size of the IRGC relative to its people, and therefore its control over Iranian people, had increased, and that was such a gift to IRGC.
It would have happened anyway. That's the thing, because look, because I think that it's very difficult for for the West to actually understand what the IRGC is, because a lot of the time they just think it's this like paramilitary group. The IRGC is literally a state within the state. This is the best definition I could give of it, in the sense that you have the regular army and then you have the IRGC. Within the IRGC, you have a shadow judicial system. You have the paramilitary group, intelligence services, and Basij, which acts as the paramilitary of the IRGC in terms of spying on civilians. So in Iran, you have a two-speed society, in that you have the regular judicial run by the Ministry of Justice, And then you have the IRGC judicial system that is completely different from the normal legal system in Iran. And that goes for every facet of society, where they have their own jails within, the government jails, and nobody can tell them how to run it. The legal system is completely different, when it comes to IRGC. When it comes to them running a shadow economy to that of the government, a lot of the time, by the way, they run contrary to national interest, and ministers cannot do anything against the IRGC because they have more powers than ministers. And they have a special status, and they have monopolies on certain industries. The VPN, for example. So in Iran, you can't have access to social media, right? So most Iranians have to use a VPN to be able to get access to Facebook, Twitter, whatever, YouTube. Now, the VPN companies, offering those services are actually run by the IRGCs because they created a system to then benefit and make millions and millions of dollars of it. And on top of it, cherry on the cake, they get to spy on their people for free. I mean, people literally pay for the IRGC to spy on them. That tells you that regardless of sanctions, no sanction, that would have happened, because again, this is part of the structure of the regime, and how Ayatollah Khomeini actually imagined the best way he could protect himself and create a buffer around him that would isolate him and insulate him from any type of opposition. So that means that in Iran today, the army is almost crippled, and they can't do anything against the IRGC. If, for example, the Ministry of Justice disagree with the judge who is part of the IRGC, there's nothing he can do. Say, the IRGC will do whatever it needs to do. So I don't think for a second that sanctions have prevented this kind of healthy competition that you're talking about, because again, you're thinking with a Western mind in terms of what that means to enter the world markets, and allowing companies to come in the country and to operate and have kind of a solid competition rules. It doesn't apply to Iran, because what would have happened is that the IRGC would have forced certain sponsorships and literally grab hold of certain industries, forcing the international communities to play by its rule, and then gaining even more power and money. So the only thing that we have done is slow down that process. And grant you, it hurts millions of Iranians, and it's a catastrophe and it's a tragedy in itself. But those were the weapons that we had at our disposal to try to, short of military interventionism, to try to encourage the people of Iran to kind of rise up against the regime. And I'm really not advocating sanctions here, because I think it's disgusting, because it's harming innocent people that have asked for nothing. But I understand the rationale behind it. I'm not trying to justify, I understand it. And I'm telling you, and this is, data actually shows you that, without this sanction, things would have been much worse. The problem that we have is that we see the pain that Iranians are suffering, and we feel guilt, and we should, because we are responsible for that pain. And we're thinking, I want to stop this. But the only way you can stop that pain and the suffering of Iranian people is get rid of the regime. That's it. We could discuss it all day. At the end of the day, they have to go. Once they're gone and we can have a democratic discourse, then Iran has a chance at actually rejoining the rest of the international community and become, productive members of society again.
Susanna, you had some questions?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, Catherine just has got me thinking on so many different levels. So we were previously talking about, the original deal and then pulling out and the benefits of that, or not. But I think it'd be interesting to talk about the most recent round of negotiations, or trying to re-enter the deal, particularly in regard to the IRGC, because the recent round of negotiations kind of revealed that a major sticking point, what I'm hearing is that things are near completion, but there is the sticking point regarding the sanctioning of the IRGC. Mm-hmm. And I don't know to what extent this was leaked or to what extent it's just public, but it was revealed that there is actually talk of removing the IRGC from the, terrorist designation list. And this caused huge outrage when this was kind of revealed. And I mean, Israel started immediately kicking up its feet. And even in the US Congress, I mean, Republicans were outraged. US Democrats were also just, kicking up their heels. I was curious about what you thought about this seeming like sticking point in the newest deal?
Okay, so when we're talking about delisting the IRGC from the terror list, that essentially means, like, in practical terms, that you would unfreeze something between 50 to 70 billions of dollars worth of assets. So if we take into account the fact that the IRGC is responsible for funding Hezbollah, Hamas, the war in Syria, PMU in Iraq, and intervening in countries such as Yemen, Bahrain, the eastern province of Qatif in Saudi Arabia, and wherever there is unrest, Iran is very often behind it. Do we seriously want to add between 50 to 70 billion worth of assets to that ability to disrupt and cause harm? I would hope not. And also, from a kind of legal standpoint, you cannot dilute this idea that when organizations are put on the terrorists, that it's then a political decision to take them in and out. It has to be a profound ideological change. The narrative hasn't changed. So, why should we? I mean, and I think it's important because, look, words matter. So you can't, for example, would anyone make the argument today that Al-Qaeda is not a terrorist organization today because politically it's uncomfortable and we would like to move, away from that? I hope not, because, that would be you trying to reframe reality, on a different plane. And the reality is it is a terrorist organization because the narrative is a terrorist narrative. Now, the IRGC is the extension of a fascist and genocidal ideology, and it is a terrorist organization. Whether people can do whatever it is that they can try to rationalize however way they want, that this is the reality that we are in today. So unless, again, there's a profound kind of like either mea culpa or change, exorcism, I don't care what it is that they need to do to change that seriously. To change that, they need to be on the terror list. And you cannot make a political argument to say we need to delist them because that would make things a lot easier to negotiate. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. It's a big fat no, because that means that any terrorist organization, including Hamas, could say, like, okay, hold on a second. So if I was to pursue nuclear ambitions, does it mean that I get delisted? If I acquire weapons of mass destruction, does it mean that I get delisted? If I'm a good boy and promise, like, sir, that I would not use it in the future? Seriously? I don't like that argument. It's very dangerous. We're setting a legal precedent. And I don't think that there should be room, we should not negotiate with terror on that level, in far as like we're changing the law and changing the definition of terror to fit a political agenda. No, certain things needs to be immovable. And, the definition of terror is one of those things. It's a concept. It's a legal term that needs to stick and not be party to, the democratic, narrative or the Republican narrative. I don't care what it is. It needs to be protected.
Yeah, no, I think the prospect of delisting the IRGC is absolutely outrageous. In regards to what you were saying about, the listing or delisting being a political decision, this is a little bit of a diversion. But what do you think about the decision to list and delist in regards to the Houthis in Yemen? Because right before, Trump left office, Pompeo slapped them, with that label on the list, and Biden immediately undid it simply because that designation would cause such massive suffering to the Yemeni people because of the inability to organize aid in the region.
Yeah.
So what do you, I think it's a really tough cost benefit analysis terms of, so what do you think about that? In opposition to what you were saying about the IRGC.
I'm going to say, I still stand by what I say. However, with the Houthis is ever so slightly different in the sense that they're not a fully fledged terrorist organization, in the sense that they don't have a genocidal agenda per se outside of their borders. So there's a slight difference there. Yes, they targeted Saudi.
I mean, their slogan is pretty.
I know. But what I mean is that so far they haven't acted on it, other than bombing the crap out of Saudi Arabia like once in a while. But at the same time they are at war with Saudi Arabia. So I'm not saying that is justified, but they haven't behaved like a de facto terrorist organization just yet. They haven't hit all the boxes. So it's kind of like, we could be slightly more say liberal about it, but it's slightly different. However, I disagree with the delisting. That I think that they should have been listed as a terrorist organization. That's my personal opinion. I understand why there were still some leeway as to why we could delist them, because again, it's not, you can't compare the Houthis to Hamas. So we need to be also careful not to just slap terrorist organization to anyone that we disagree with. And so far they haven't, they didn't blow up anything in London or Paris or anywhere else and say that was, this is our political agenda. They haven't done that. Yes, they targeted, innocent people and killed them, and they committed acts of genocide. Yes, they did that. Whether or not this was done within the framework of terrorism is an open discussion still. So I think that the jury is still out on this one. I'm not sure. I disagree with the delisting because I don't think it's helping. But I understand why it was done. So, and my kid just went through. You're on live television, honey.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. No, I have my dogs
like
here.
Oblivious to what just happened.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. I have sometimes my dogs come here and I just pick them up and just
that's
make
just
that
my
part of the
kids.
show.
So like,
Yeah.
should I call everyone else and just like coming in?
Yeah, that's fine. We don't mind that. We don't mind.
Don't worry. No.
It makes it It makes it more
lively.
relatable. It's fine. Yeah. We this is not like we're just like having fun. It's fine. It's more informal. We're a lot less formal than other shows, so this is completely fine. We do that all the time. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So when it regards to the delisting, the pushback against that is like, okay, so the delisting itself, we understand that yes, IRGC is a terrorist organization, so are the Houthis, so is Hamas, so is Hezbollah, okay? But instead of us we are trying to do a cost-benefit analysis. Even if IRGC, just like with the Houthis, delisting them, even though they are a terrorist group, delisting them was because of doing a cost-benefit analysis, figuring out what the benefits of keeping them under the list is relative to all the human misery for the Yemeni civilians. We delisted them not because they're not bad people, but we delisted them because we needed to be able to get all these NGOs have access to the civilians in Yemen. Similarly, with IRGC, some would argue, is that from a Biden administration perspective, okay, they need to get they need to reduce their involvement in the Middle East. They have tried fixing things in the Middle East and being involved, and everything they touched has turned into ashes for the past 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Like they haven't had a good experience with Iraq. They haven't had a good experience with Afghanistan.
I thought it went swimmingly.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
I know. And they're like, we have Russia and China to worry about.
Exactly. Yeah. But here's the thing. I agree with everything that you said. I agree, and I get it. However, because America decided that it wanted to play, power broker and basically, use military interventionism, thinking not only are we going to export our democracy, but we're going to fix the world problem, and then we're going to create new markets for ourselves. Because let's not just say it wasn't like a selfless agenda. Like, there were corporate interests, involved in that way of thinking. The question is now, should they have done it or not? And, would the world be better off? It did happen. So, trying to theorize whether or not they should have whatever, it doesn't matter because they've done it. So should they leave now? And I understand the urge. I mean, you would leave a vacuum. We all know what happens when there's a vacuum in the Middle East. I mean, hello Yemen, Syria, hello Afghanistan. What has happened since, America left Afghanistan? You literally served God's victory on a platter to radicals because they see it and they understand it as we and God, had a victory over the apostate, the West. That's how they understand it. And we literally gave that to them. And that they're going to run with it for the next 20 years saying, we had flip-flops and, God was with us and the angels came and helped us, to basically make a super military power bow to our will. And to some extent, they are right. That's exactly what happened, minus the angels and, whatever. But it did happen. So do you really want America to say, to call it quit and say, I'm just going to retreat behind my borders and I'm going to let Russia and China, let me repeat that, Russia and China, okay, to just divide, the Middle East up amongst themselves, because that's what's going to happen. It's already happening. I mean, Russia and China are playing, and Iran are actually playing very dangerous games in Africa. Like in Eritrea and Ethiopia, there's like a battle of will. Iran is like literally showing up in Ethiopia. Israel is freaking out, saying like, I don't think so. There's a lot that is being done. So because America decided once upon a time to intervene, then again, news for you, you can't leave, because if you do, it's not only the end of the region in terms of the status quo in between Russia, China and the West, but it's the end of the American dream. That's it. It's over. More superpower. So you would need to be okay with that. And don't do it because we don't want a world where America doesn't have some kind of a say. It's not a good ending to that story. It cannot happen. So you're gonna have to man up and realize that we might have made many mistakes, but let's not make the biggest one of all, which is to leave and let like a massive gap. And then who knows what's going to come into it. And when it comes to the Middle East, nothing good ever comes into a vacuum, ever.
What about the theory that the best way to control a country is to just trade with them a lot so that your economies get intermingled and you depend on each other's success?
Mm-hmm.
And then and that way more people that they can't people who are more interested in prosperity of their countries will have an upper hand over people who are more ideological in countries by giving them trade, and removing the barriers of trade will basically shift the power from a country that is run by ideological people more towards people that are in line with seeing the country grow and prosper. Wouldn't that be a better way? It worked after World War II. United States basically, instead of after World War I, the world decided to punish Germany, and we saw what happened after that. We had got World War II out of that, right? But after World War II, the Allied countries decided to build up Germany and Japan, and now they are very advanced economies and they're buddies and the best allies of United States. And maybe we should use that model instead of trying to isolate the country and suffocate it and make it suffer. Wouldn't that actually create more radicals and more fundamentalists? Maybe if we just open the door and trade with them, it would encourage the people that would benefit from that. It will encourage them to come into power instead. What do you think?
I would say yes. By the way, Germany and Japan, were not, build themselves back up. They were not helped. They were crippled by, economics. They had to pay debt back. So it's not like we helped a lot. We allowed them to, but, they built themselves back up because they decided to move away from, any imperialistic agenda. So that was a conscious decision that they made to move away from war and fascism. That's important because it does matter. So the way Germany is what it is today because it decided to change, its way of being and thinking. So it's not like the West did not build Germany back up. Germany did that. Don't take it away from that. But anyway, I would say yes, I agree with you. Trade is always the best thing. This is why we have the Abrahamic Accords, by the way, and this is why it's working. And they, eventually thinking of creating some kind of a NATO type of alliance, militarily speaking, to further those ties and to really kind of entrench this idea that Israel, is a friendly country and a reliable partner for, countries such as Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Sudan, blah, blah, blah. Now, in normal terms, I would tell you that, trading with your neighbors is always a good way. Which is why in medieval time people used to intermarry, so that this idea that we have a common vested interest and that you don't want to bash me because we're related and we have trade deals, and it's just you would harm yourself, I'm harming me. That works when when your partner is on the same kind of playing field as you, when you have some kind of a common understanding of what needs to happen in order for both society to flourish. Okay, and in the West, we kind of got this down for the most part, in relation to our neighbors and the way that, for example, America, deals with Mexico and Canada and things like that. It works more or less. Now, when you're talking to a fascist countries such as that of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it doesn't work anymore. Because then you are, by partnering yourself with a country such as this, you're paying lip service to fascism. You're basically helping fascism thrive, encroach itself onto your society, and offer it longevity. So my way of thinking would be, when we're dealing with the likes of North Korea or Iran, is to isolate those countries to the point of suffocation. I'm talking about the regime, to politically sanction the crap out of them, to make sure that they do not last. Because you can't allow, in the name of peace, to allow fascism to thrive, because fascism, if fascism needs walls and needs to expand, this is part of the ideology. So for the sake of a temporary peace, to allow for this ideology to grow and thrive, would be condemning, future generations to fight a greater war. So my idea is you need to hold Iran accountable for what it is doing, before international law. And slap sanctions onto it when they broke the law, and make sure that, we made an example out of them. Now, the terrible reality of that is that in the process of doing this, you're condemning millions of people to abject poverty. But I don't have a solution to that. That's the problem. So if anyone could find a third way where, innocent people would not have to suffer, sign me up. Because I don't want anyone to suffer. But the reality, we live in a world where, injustice is a thing. A lot of the time, life isn't fair. But we did not come up with any other solution. So if you have one, go for it. But to plead peace and say that let's be friends with the Islamic Republic of Iran, I'm not playing in that playground. I can't.
So I heard some, before I go to Susanna, because she has some questions, but some very smart people are trying to come up with this thing called smart sanctions. And a lot of people are working on it. And it's some very, I don't know, complicated, maybe financial, figuring out how to come up with specific sanctions that hurts individuals, specific individuals rather than an entire nation. And it's a very complicated thing on how to figure out on how to do that best. I don't know, maybe sanctioning certain individual with multiple degrees of separation, so that not only he's sanctioned, anybody who touches him also becomes sanctioned.
So you create pariahs without the system. Yeah.
If
you could just freeze the assets and make sure that they can't even have access to the internet. Great.
Well, yeah, I don't know how the details around how it's supposed to work, but some people are trying to figure out how to target individuals rather than entire populations. But I don't know how far we've gotten with that. But Susanna, go ahead.
Well, it's very interesting to hear you talk about, how we can't negotiate with the state in its current state and its current iteration, given its inherent fascistic nature, which then raises the question. And I know before the show we talked about this a little bit, and I don't know if it's too early to talk about this, but I'm very curious about your ideas about building up a legitimate, well-structured Iranian opposition.
Wow. So now you just said that, so everybody's going to be thinking that I'm actually the architect of the opposition in Iran.
Good.
yeah, I got powers. I think, look, and I'm not well versed in the opposition, in the sense that I'm not privy to what is it that they're working on in terms of the structure, what structure they even they're imagining for when after the regime falls. But I know that they're lacking in there's no real consensus as to what would happen. What would it look like, after the regime, is gone? Would we have a parliamentary monarchy? Would we have a republic? What would it be? We don't know. And I don't think that Iranians know either, because they didn't have the opportunity to have that conversation openly. So I think that we need to prepare ourselves for, a transition period. Where I would imagine someone with kind of with mind the reign of powers for a little bit. I don't know. So that would mean you have to dissolve the Islamic Republic completely, because we can't allow for anything to just remain. So that needs to go. Now, would they go back the previous system, like, under Reza Shah, for example, and allow him to kind of resume his power's legacy, and then, to bring about a republic instead. I don't know what that would even look like. I don't even know how legally you would go about doing something like that. Whether you have a transitional council, with all the members of the opposition sitting there to try to kind of come up with a new constitution, because, they're going to have to write down a constitution. It's going to be complicated. And the problem, I don't know how long it would take. And again, you take the risk of having a vacuum of power, so it could be dangerous. But I mean, the alternative is not to think about. So.
Yeah, I think it's extremely difficult because right now the most organized and structured opposition is the MEK.
No, they're not structured. No. They're projecting this because, they have like the like of, what's his name? The former mayor of New York that just showed up at one of their Giuliani. Just because you have people like this, they give you this impression of, oh, we're so well organized and we have this, cute little rose and there's a conference and a flag, we're so well structured. No, it's a cult.
I was about to say they're terrorist.
They have like political agenda is like me, look at me, this is my picture, please bow. That's not a political agenda. And they have an army of little trolls, behind the computers to try to give this impression that they're also very popular. In Iran, they are pariah. Nobody gives a shit about them. Yes. They don't care. Yes. They hate them. They're murderers and whatever. And no. The MEK is just like, it's not even a joke. It's like this Scientology. Like, seriously.
No,
can you imagine Tom Cruise running for the presidency? Like, please. Come on.
I guess I just mean in terms of like, they do have a supposed Congress. They do have structures. They were able to
I could do that in my living room. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But, anyone could do in the living room, slap the word Congress and then put a big flag and say, like, I'm running the opposition now. I mean, I could do that too, but that doesn't make it so.
On the other hand, it's like we have that, and then we have a lot of people who are general opposition, but there's just such a culture of conspiracy that we were discussing that it is extremely corrosive to structured and productive organizing. Because if there is dissent, then that's seen as, oh, you're controlled opposition of the regime, which is so toxic. You can't build anything off of that. That's like trying to build a foundation on sand.
But that's the kind of culture that the regime has fostered. Mm-hmm. Just to show you the toxicity of that regime. This is exactly what they want, because by doing that, they're controlling the opposition in a way by preventing any possible popular consensus or any rallying behind an idea or even a cause. So they just keep saying, like, this one works for that one, and they're lying and and then people don't know what to do and they're scared, and so they do nothing.
I think I was having an interesting conversation with Armin the other day about how this conspiracy culture within the opposition is almost its own way of like cancel culture. Like it's permeated to the extent that because like people go after Masih Linajad all the time. One, because she used to be a reformist, and two, because of her popularity now. Like they can't conceptualize the fact that she's mainstream now off of, her connections or her merit. It's that there's something going on, right? There's something more sinister. And so they discredit and shut out any of her accomplishments or anything that she does do to bolster the voices of people living in Iran, because she must be controlled. She must be on their side to be able to reach this height, right? It's just cancel culture.
She's a woman too, so she's going to face that kind of, thinking, because they can't even possibly comprehend that a woman could be not only courageous and smart, but, well educated and actually have, the ambition to speak for an entire people, her people. So there's that too.
Yeah.
Just one commentary on the MEK. So, like, I mean, when you compare them to the Scientologists, I mean, they're a cult. I call them the cult of Mariam Rajavism because they literally worship her. But Scientology is also, as cuckoo as they are, they're also very well organized. I
was comparing the kookiness, not so much the organization. Yes, you are. The Scientology is very well structured, and if the MEK was like that, I would be scared. But they're not, and they're like a dying breed too, by the way.
But I don't know if you've seen
they're recruiting new people.
I should send you some videos of what their their annual events and the thing like
I've
it just
seen some of them, and it's just I've watched this documentary that
yeah.
a French guy did, because they hosted by the French. I don't know what my country is doing.
Yeah.
I don't know what's up with that. So
We
he
have
went to
money.
this. Yeah, I guess so. I don't know
I
what
think
it
you have
is.
Saudi money. It's probably
Yeah,
Saudi money. Yeah,
there's
I think
a lot of things. There's a lot of moving parts to like why the MK is tolerated. But anyway, so he did this documentary, and it's insane, because even the mayor of the city where they're at is like not, they're scared to even talk to them. Those people are just literally, certified
yeah.
nut jobs. I mean, to the point where I think that Ayatollah Khamenei next to them is like, sane. So
Yeah, and actually Khamenei
scary.
uses like the Islamic Republic of Iran likes to use them because they're like, look, if we get rid of us, this is
You
what you
got
have to
that.
deal with.
Exactly. I know. So they're like we're good now, but no,
Yeah.
look, you have people now, I think, that are kind of like coming up. But it's again, like what Susanna was saying, it's there's so much toxicity around that, and there's a lack of trust, and it's just so easy for them to just think that you have a nefarious agenda, that you're serving the interests of another country, that there's always something necessarily bad about that you're lying, that you're not saying exactly what you want to say. It's very difficult for people to get behind anybody, and actually but I think it's a lack of hope, because they've been betrayed so many times that they just and they're scared too. They're scared that maybe the IRGC is actually taking control over the opposition, and that they're going to end up in jail if they were to come out in support of this organization or that organization. There's a lot of work to do, and I think that we need good old-fashioned political PR, and kind of like to create like little ad posts and echo chambers for people to kind of feel a bit more comfortable and normalize the idea of an opposition in Iran.
I think the lack of legitimate and well-structured opposition is, I mean, obviously, like one of the main deterrents towards regime change, but not even like the fact that that's necessary, but the lack of replacement makes it in the US's interest to not have regime change in Iran. I don't think the US wants regime change in Iran. We don't want another vacuum.
But it's going to happen. It's not like the situation is not. I think that they might have tried to kind of contain the situation, but I think everyone. I mean, maybe not everyone, because Biden is Biden. The clock is ticking. So I honestly don't see the regime beyond 2-3 years from now. I don't see
2-3 years.
Yeah,
wow.
I really don't. I don't like things. I don't know if you've seen these the fear factor has been broken. So there's for example, the other day a friend of mine sent me there was scene of a teacher somewhere, I think it was up north, where he was going to be arrested by the IRGCs, where the people literally literally beat the crap out of the IRGC, saying like, you're not going to take him, and even the student union, that the university that he was speaking on behalf of is backing him up. So like people are starting to actually say no. They're pushing back a lot against the IRGC. They are very, very much hated. And then there's a movement kind of coming from the north, like Azerbaijan area, where they kind of like they're pushing, and in Kurdish areas too. There's a pushback against the IRGC where they're literally getting killed. They have little militias organized. So there's violence in Iran right now. It's not talked about a lot, because they want to give this impression that everything is under control. It's not. But they're feeling the heat right now.
I know, but their relative power to what the Artish and the IRGC have access to is very, very, very limited.
True, but again, any fascist government, I mean, you need to have this kind of tacit agreement, where power needs to be given, not taken. So the people need to agree to some level, to kind of give out their power so that the government could function. This it's necessary for any government to be able to do what it needs to do. So even in a fascist situation, the people have somewhat to be subservient to the authority that this state is claiming for itself. Correct? When that goes, and if the people decide to say no, I'm not playing that game anymore. I will not become a party, to your regime or give you the power that I hold. It's over. There's a saying in France, it's Latin, but we say it a lot in France, where we say Vox Populi, Vox Dei, where the voice of the people is the voice of God. And that's true. Without the people's support and consensus, there's nothing that Iranians can do. Nothing. They won't survive a day. Which is why revolution works. So it might be very difficult because again, the power play is just profoundly in favor of the Islamic Republic. It doesn't mean that Iranians don't have the power to overturn everything, and it wouldn't take even that much. If you had remember Egypt. I mean, Mubarak was like the guy that you could not, he was the pharaoh of Egypt, right? And he was gone in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but we
I know
also
Armin has a lot of disagreement.
No, I mean, I don't know, because I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't think there are also many examples throughout history of tyrants who people were not happy with them, and they just lasted for a very long time. It's not necessarily a rule that just because the people are not happy, that means the regime is going to fall.
No. I said it's not about happiness. I was making a comment on, in order for a state to maintain its authority, you need to be subservient to some degree to that authority and recognize it. Okay. When revolutions happen, it's like when you are actively and willing saying no and pushing against that authority and not recognizing that authority and challenging it. That's when revolutions happen. So I'm not saying that, people have lived throughout history, under fascism for generations and even centuries. I mean, the Romans, for example.
I just think
people to some degree agreed to it.
I'm just thinking IRGC has 5 main pieces. One of those pieces is the Quds army, which is a small section of the entire IRGC, and that by itself managed to defeat ISIS in many battles. And I'm just thinking the entirety of IRGC plus Artesh plus Niruye Intozami plus the police versus the people of Iran who don't even have access to the weapons. I mean, even compared to history, modern military equipment is more than enough for 1% of the population to be able to control 99% of the rest of the population. I just don't see. I'm just trying to. I actually have a show about this in Persian.
Do you actually see? Do you see a situation where? Because I don't think that it would happen, and I know the. I mean, do you seriously see a situation where the army would willingly genocide their own people? I don't see it. I mean, even in Egypt,
they did that.
No, they have, but no, I'm not talking about. Remember Egypt? I mean, if you go back to 2011. And you had, I'm sure you remember, you had this kind of standoff, in the bridge, and you had the people versus the military and police, the armed police, and and they were coming closer and closer and closer. The military got overwhelmed, and I tell you what, they could not do it anymore. They could not do any more shooting. There's a point where you say, I can't. As a person, as a human being, I cannot do that anymore, and they stopped. The people, not the
better
leadership.
Than IRGC, because IRGC
the people stopped, but there's only so much that they would be able to do. There's only so much, because I think they would be either overwhelmed because people would get seriously angry, and I don't care what weapons you have. I mean, we've seen in Egypt, there was people literally going after tanks. I mean, don't underestimate the power of the people. And I'm not trying to romanticize a revolution, but the people, first of all, people of Iran would have access to weapons, because let's not be fooled, other countries would come and chip in. I'm pretty sure that Iraq would be seriously volunteering weapons, because they don't like the Islamic Republic of Iran either. So Iranians would not be fighting alone. And I'm pretty sure that too, you have people who are part of the IRGC who hate the regime and are just waiting for an opportunity to defect. But they can't do it. So you're going to see some kind of a slide where people will start to defect. The same thing happened in Egypt, and then you can start to see the cracks of the regime. The regime in Iran is not as whole and together than people make it out to be, just because they're projecting that fear factor.
If it happens, would you be 10? Do you think me and you 10 years from now could have a beer in Tehran?
If I can have pink gin, because I don't drink beer, I will do pink gin with you, or tequila. If you could do shots of tequila, I'm there. 100%.
Wait, I
Tehran.
drink tequila.
Okay,
That's
Can we
what
go to
girls are there.
Esfahan?
Yeah,
It's my dream.
if we can do tequila in can you imagine doing tequila like tequila in Mashhad? Could we do that?
Catherine, it's my dream to go to Esfahan. We should go together.
Yeah, it is beautiful. It is gorgeous.
Do you think that's possible? Like, do you think that we would
Yeah.
live to see the day?
Yeah, 100%. I don't.
Oh.
I'm gonna let you go there first, though. Like you can just kind
Oh,
of like
no.
check it out. Yeah,
Armin's
and then
not
I'm gonna-
going. He's not going.
I don't know if I
mean-
would ever go. I don't know. I would need to. I don't know.
See, like, even if the regime falls, right? I think there's at least 10 million people in Iran that are supporting of this current regime. Okay, out of 80 million, I would think like at least 10 million of them are like that. And out of that 10 million, there's at least 1 million of them that are ready to sacrifice their own lives, even for Khamenei or something like that.
Do you
Yeah,
think so?
at least 1 million. At least 1 million.
Well,
Out of them. So I'm just like, even if the regime falls, I don't even think like, even like, let's say the regime falls and there's the next government is not like another dictatorial Shia regime. Let's say there's a secular democracy comes to Iran one day. I still don't know if I would feel safe in Iran, because one of the, it just takes one of those 1 million to just come and like, oh, this is Armin, like maybe let me just go find him and like, I don't know, go stabby on him. I don't know. Like, so I don't know if that would be a good idea.
yeah. No, so just like wait it out. Just let other people go first, and just say like, you know.
Yeah.
If they don't come out of shish kebab, then you could go.
So I have one more question before we end the stream. I just want to know, what do you think? Let's say the deal will go through, and we don't know what's going to happen to it. What should Israel do to defend itself? What measures it should take?
See, I don't like this kind of questions because I'm not Israeli, and I personally think that it's not my place to tell Israel what to do, or even tell Israeli how they should conduct their affairs, because I don't live their reality day to day, and I think, I would like to be respectful of Israel, because Israel keeps getting like talked over all the time, and it's just, I don't want to add to that. So I could give you my personal opinion, but that's coming from someone who's never, who's on the outside of it, and never had to suffer under bombing. So it's complicated for me to have like a good grasp of what reality feels like in Israel, and what they would want to, for the future. But I think that Israel would stay true to the kind of commitment that it made, since the very beginning, which is to protect life. Which is to try to, to exert restraint in its response and be tactical rather than, reactive and violent to acts of aggression. I think that what it's been doing so far in terms of targeting, nuclear sites and everything that goes, with that, has been the least destructive, methods in terms of containing the threat without, claiming too many lives and having casualties on the ground. I think that it has been the right path, and I think they will continue to do so. And to work with countries in the region in terms of, Abrahamic Accords to try to, build stronger ties and make the region more stable and safer for everyone, not just for its own people. And to try to, create a buffer that is so robust and strong that the Islamic Republic of Iran will come up against, the Great Wall of China, so to speak, and not have any grip. I think that's what it needs to do. But if I could just add one more thing, it's just whoever is listening, and regardless of how people feel about Israel, people need to understand one thing: is that Israel is a sovereign state. That according to international law, it has every right to defend itself against threats within its territories. However, it sees fit. And I'm sick and tired of people telling Israel what it should or shouldn't do, and crying for projecting this kind of victimhood narrative onto the Palestinians, thinking that they're doing the Palestinians a service when the Palestinians are suffering under Hamas and have been hijacked and being blackmailed by Hamas. If people want to truly defend the Palestinian cause, what they need to understand is that in order to do so, they need to make sure that Israel is free of terrorism. And then we can have a proper conversation. And also, being pro-Palestinians doesn't mean being anti-Zionist, and being pro-Zionist doesn't mean that you're anti-Palestinians. The two can coexist. So defending Israel, the Israeli cause, is actually defending the Palestinians' right to have a better future. And that is important. It's not a zero-sum game here. That's it.
Would you be interested in coming over and talking more about the whole Israel-Palestine thing at some point?
Yeah, I live with that shit.
Yuval is one of our Israeli Atheist Republic members, and he's giving you a standing ovation in the live chat.
Thank you. I'm just like,
well, talking about standing ovations, Bojack is saying that if you become the leader of the opposition, we will conquer Tehran in 3 days. No.
I'm just like, I'm okay. I'm good.
By the way, I just want to thank this Secular Secretary for constantly donating to us, and also an anonymous person who keeps donating. So thank you for that. Qasim has
for the donations.
Thank you so much for the donations.
Yeah, keep donating to them. It's just like brilliant. Go.
Thank you.
I'm like a little publicist, like, woo!
Oh yeah, and also, but guys, one more time for the people who weren't here at the beginning, please go read Catherine's articles on the Times of Israel. Are you going to publish more articles for the Times of Israel?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a piece about, what I just said, about Israel's right to defend its borders, and this theory of mine that I have, that defending Israel's right to defend its borders however it sees fit, is actually, defending the world's security. It would make the world a much safer place if Israel could be left alone and people to stop being so anti-Semitic about, their disapproval of Israel. And, Israel is a tiny little country, leave us alone.
Okay, so when you write that, can you send it to us so we could read it and then talk about it?
For sure, yeah.
Okay.
I need you guys to publicize my work.
We love it.
We will.
Actually, you should write to the Times of Israel and say, like, she's wonderful. Like, oh my God, like, you should be so proud.
I actually do really like your writing. Like, I do really recommend people go look at Catherine's writing at the Times of Israel, or just in general. Like, you have a really good, and I don't know how to, like, I just really like your literary voice, like the way you actually express
that
your
actually
ideas.
Means a lot. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Okay, guys, go to the Times of Israel and message Times of Israel and tell them that you really enjoyed this article, so that they know that. Yep.
Yuval is in the live chat and he's saying "Mamnum Junam." Thank you, my dear. And Qasim, who's one of our Atheist Republic members in Iran, says Zoroastrians have saved the Jews once in history. Now it's your turn to save us.
Like, pick up that flame, like, go for it, like, we're behind you, go.
Qasim had a question regarding, I don't know if you want to answer this because it was more related to our previous episode. He was just curious about why you attended the Arabian pilgrimage. Do you want to quickly address?
Yeah, as I was invited, so like it's usually like I'm just like, if I get invited somewhere that sounds interesting, I'm gonna go. Yeah, I wanted to see the Arabian pilgrimage because it's like 20+ million people. It's a lot bigger than Hajj. It's in Iraq, I kind of wanted to have an understanding of what that meant on the ground. And I knew that a lot of Iranian, head of states and like important figures would be there too. And that would be an opportunity for me to actually meet them and have a chat and a kind of informal way. Because it's not like, you don't have like a lot of like you don't have a lot of media per se. So it's kind of more like, meeting behind closed doors, and people feel a lot more relaxed. It's a pilgrimage, and they kind of open up a bit more. And I was just like super curious, because how often are you invited to see behind the veil of Shia Islam and kind of like have an understanding of what goes down behind closed doors? So yeah, of course I want to, because I can't. I mean, there's no way I'm going to go to Mecca ever. So I was thinking like I could do that one.
Why not go to Mecca?
Nah, Saudi. No, not good. Saudi Arabia. I said stuff. No. Actually, okay. I'm not trying to go back on the list of his good favors, but yeah, I used to be super critical of Mohammed bin Salman, and I'm not saying I changed my mind, but I think like he's actually doing some good stuff over, so it's not just all bad. I'm just gonna give you that.
Well, I mean, there's nobody's pure evil, but Mohammed bin Salman.
Exactly. And I think I kind of
pretty close.
But I think Mohammed bin Salman,
do you know what
in my opinion, is pretty close. Yeah.
What I think it is that I think he's also, and I'm not saying he's a victim because he's not a victim. but I think he's like a prisoner of a system, and that he has not architected, that he kind of inherited, and then he's doing what he can to remain in power while doing some of the stuff that he feels are necessary.
I mean, all evil people are victims of their environment. So
yeah, I'm not saying I'm not like Khashoggi. We know, like I'm not trying to like
mostly Yemen, mostly Yemen. Well, I mean, we already talked about that.
But I mean, like if I was to choose what kind of friend I would like to have in the region, I think that he's I'm not saying he's a partner, but he's someone we can talk to and have discussions, like reasonable, rational discussion. He's a rational person, so you could he's not a
evil rational person, maybe.
Yeah, but he's not a religious lunatic, so that there's a plus.
I mean, lunacy comes in all forms, not just religious.
That is laughing. Look, we're trying to we're
surrounded so low.
We're trying. So it's just like, but there you go. I'm just gonna. I still can't go to Saudi Arabia. You make me say things like it's your fault now.
I have such hatred for that man that I can't let, because of his role in the greatest humanitarian crisis that we are aware of, in our lifetime, right? I don't think there's any way to wash that with anything. And I'm not saying other parties are not responsible. Iran, the Islamic Republic is responsible. The Houthis are responsible.
Guys,
America is responsible.
I have to go. I have to go because I have the phone call that we talked about like in 9 minutes.
Yes.
And
all
it's not Mossad.
Yes, I'm sad. Okay. Well, we'll end it here. Thank you so much, Catherine. This was really,
You're welcome.
really
Thank
good.
you, guys.
All
it was so much
Bye.
fun.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.
How do I leave?
Okay, guys, before we leave the stream, like the video. This was pretty good. This was pretty informative. Susanna, wouldn't you say that was a good interview?
It was fantastic.
It was fantastic. We did a great job.
Catherine.
Yeah, this was really informative. So, guys, please do not leave without liking this video. I think we deserve a like. Susanna, do you not agree? Don't we deserve a like?
Oh, definitely.
We deserve a like. And even if you want to be extra generous, maybe also share with somebody and tell people to watch this interview. Okay, please help us grow this channel. We would very much appreciate that. Oh yeah,
and
look, people are...
Before we leave, Secular Sakai donated another $5. So thank you so much.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Secular Sakai. And Secular Rarity is saying, "Wow, great stream." Thank you so much. And also, Secular Sakai is also saying, "Awesome stream." And Soha is doing all our work for us for some reason. She keeps doing all the work and reminding people in the live chat to like and subscribe and hit the bell button and all of that. Thank you so much, Soha, for all of that. Anyways, guys, we're going to head out. Thank you so much for watching this, and we'll see you on the next stream. Bye.
Okay. Bye.